When you hear the words national parks, what pops into your head? Maybe you think of the rising granite of Half Dome at Yosemite, or Old Faithful Geyser at Yellowstone, maybe glaciers on mountain peaks, or just stunningly tall trees. But what about the sounds of national parks? The National Park Service thinks that protecting the natural soundscapes that we hear is just as important as protecting the grand landscapes that we see. We talked with the scientists at Denali whose job it is to record and analyze the sounds that make up the park soundscape. Dave Shirakawa is a biologist and natural resource manager. He has been involved with the National Park Service Soundscape program for 4 years.
I had a really interesting experience a few years ago when I had a visitor from Japan. And this was an 87-year-old lady that I knew from Japan, and she had lived in a very urban area her whole life. And I was taking her on a short hike, and we came to an overlook, and the view was really pretty, but her comment was, "I can't believe how quiet it is here." And providing a place for people to have that type of epiphany is really an essential mission to the Park Service, and I think it's very important.
Jared Withers is a physical scientist at Denali who also studies soundscapes. Jared works on portions of the Soundscape Inventory project at Denali year-round.
In the summer, it's all fun. When we're collecting data, there's a lot of equipment that's out in the field that needs to be maintained. It's a constant schedule of hiking out to stations to download data and make sure they're still running and haven't been chewed on by bears. In the fall and winter months, it's a little bit less glamorous. A lot of time with headphones on, listening to all the data that the stations have captured and doing report writing and data analysis.
Jared has heard in the recording sounds like the wind blowing, the noise of planes flying overhead, and even the sound of bees pollinating. But the most impressive sound happens when bears come to visit the sound station.
The microphones have these windscreens on them that block the wind noise from being recorded, and they're just fuzzy looking covers, and they just look like a nice little ground squirrel. And the bears are just very attracted to them. They come to the stations and they chew up the windscreens, and then they go away. And sometimes they knock over tripods and other things while they're doing it. So the sound of a bear chewing on the microphone, in your headphones, kind of sounds like what it would sound like for a bear to chew on your ear.
During the summer, sound stations in 8 locations around Denali take 5-second recordings 288 times per day. In each clip, Jared identifies the sound and its loudness. Then he calculates a number of statistics, including the number of times per day that the sound is audible. That is a lot of data analysis to do.
It's good to be able to spend long hours listening with headphones to the data that the stations collect, because the analysis is only as good as your level of attention.
Dave Shirakawa says that when you stop and pay attention to the soundscape, you find that each spot has its own unique soundscape. Soundscapes of particular places change dramatically as the seasons change.
For example, on the Kahiltna Glacier, which is the base camp for climbing Mount McKinley, in the spring and early summer, one would hear almost continuous sounds of small aircraft, especially if the weather was good. In the same location, if the weather was poor, it would be almost silent, except for maybe the quiet conversations of climbers getting their gear ready to head up the mountain. At the very same spot in the middle of the winter, probably all you would hear is wind and the very occasional sound of a high-flying jet. Another location in Denali, Calico Creek, which is deep in the backcountry, in early summer one would hear the sound of water and birds, ground squirrels. If you're really lucky, you may hear the sounds of wolves howling. On the ridges of Cathedral Mountain, one would hear the sound of wind and the noises of doll sheep, lambs bleating for their moms.
Soundscapes are a new area of official study for the National Park Service. Since the year 2000, Denali has been inventorying its sounds. The information collected is important because it is a good measure of the level of human influence on the parks. Dave says that there are actions that you can take to preserve the soundscapes.
These actions include things like turning off their cell phones, not using motorcycles that have altered mufflers, not yelling, not bringing boom boxes. Disabling car alarms is a big one. And then on a broader scale, citizens can work with their elected representatives in the government to encourage legislation to create flight-free zones over national parks and wilderness areas.
So, what do you think? Should the National Park Service be in the business of soundscape preservation? What sounds would you like to hear if you came to visit Denali? And something else to think about, do you think that Denali's soundscapes will sound the same in 100 years? How about 500 years? Or even 1,000?